Do not touch humans. The last warning the Galactic Council ignored. They took our people on a Tuesday. I know that detail sounds small. It sounds like the kind of thing that should not matter when you are talking about an interstellar incident that nearly reshaped the political structure of 40 civilizations. But I remember it clearly because I was sitting in the observation lounge of Research Station Halo 7, drinking terrible coffee and watching the gas giant below rotate in slow, indifferent loops when the alert came through. 11 crew members of the cargo freighter Aldwych Bridge had been seized by Kreth Dominion forces in the outer corridor. Seized. That was the word the report used. Neat. Clinical. Like someone had picked up a pen off a desk. My name is Ilara Voss. I was 34 years old when it happened, and I was serving as a junior human diplomat attached to a Galactic Council observation post near the edge of what most species called settled space. My job on most days was to attend meetings, take notes, translate human requests into language that would not offend anyone and wait. Mostly wait. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for 19 years by then, and we were still very much on the outside of every real conversation. Tolerated, occasionally interesting, rarely taken seriously. The Council had a nickname for us. They called us the Loud Children, not to our faces, of course, but we heard it. Everyone always hears it eventually. I pulled up the full report on my screen. The Aldwych Bridge was a mid-range freighter, registered out of the port city of Aberdeen, running legal agricultural goods through a corridor that had been designated open transit under 3 separate council trade agreements. The Kreth Dominion had stopped it, boarded it, and detained the crew. Their official reason, filed within hours with the Council Secretariat, cited a subsection of Bylaw 44C, which concerned unauthorized passage through contested economic zones. The corridor in question had not been contested for 11 years. The filing was neat, confident, and clearly prepared in advance. I forwarded the report to my senior advisor, a Velthari named Councillor Oren, and went to find him in his office. He read it twice, said nothing for a long moment, and then told me he would raise it at the next available session. The next available session was 4 days away. I sat with that for a moment. 4 days. 11 people in a detention hold somewhere in Kreth space, and the solution was a calendar entry. I went back to my desk and started reading council law, not because I had a plan. I did not have a plan. I was one junior diplomat at a small observation post, and I had no authority to do anything except attend meetings and take notes. But I needed to do something with my hands, something with my mind, or I was going to spend the next 4 days staring at that gas giant and feeling useless. I started with the trade agreements, moved through the transit bylaws, and then, because I am the kind of person who reads everything, I found myself in the foundational documents, the original charter, the agreements and articles that had been written at the very beginning of the council, thousands of years before humanity had even reached its own moon. Most of it was procedural, governance structures, voting weights, dispute resolution timelines, dry material even for someone who genuinely liked legal documents. But near the front, in a section that predated most of the current membership by several thousand years, there was a short article, Article 0. It had no subsections. It was not referenced anywhere in the modern bylaws. It had never, as far as I could find, been cited in any council proceeding. It read simply, "Do not touch humans, do not provoke them, do not make them remember what they are." I read it 3 times. Then I went to find Councillor Oren again. He was at his desk, working through a stack of diplomatic correspondence, and when I showed him the article on my tablet, something happened to his face that I had never seen happen to a Velthari before. They were composed people, formal, precise, almost architectural in the way they carried themselves. But when Oren read those 2 lines, the color shifted in the membranes around his eyes, which is the Velthari equivalent of going pale, and he set the tablet down very carefully, as if it were something fragile. I asked him what it meant. He told me it was a historical footnote, an artifact from a time when the council was much younger and its members were still learning how to write governing documents. He said it had no legal standing in modern proceedings. I asked him who wrote it. He said the species that authored that section of the charter no longer existed. I asked him why it was still in the document if it had no legal standing. He looked at me for a moment, and then he said he had other correspondence to attend to, and he would see me at the session on Friday. I went back to my desk. I thought about those words for a long time. Do not make them remember what they are. What did that mean? What were we exactly that needed to be forgotten? I had grown up on Earth, gone to school, studied law and diplomacy, spent years learning how to be patient and quiet and diplomatic in rooms full of species who had been navigating the galaxy for centuries before humans had figured out that planets orbited stars. I did not feel like something that needed a warning label in a founding charter. But I kept thinking about it. The council session on Friday went almost exactly as I had expected. The Kreth ambassador presented their legal argument. It was polished and confident and technically just plausible enough to give everyone an excuse to defer. Our senior ambassador, a careful man named Philip Crane, presented the human counterargument with measured precision. He was good. He made strong points. The chamber listened politely. Then they voted to table the motion, pending further legal review. Further legal review would take a minimum of 60 days. I sat in the observer gallery and watched it happen, and I thought about 11 people in a detention hold and an article that no one had read in thousands of years. I thought about Counselor Oren's face when he saw those words. I thought about the species that had written them and the fact that they were gone now, and I wondered if anyone had ever connected those two facts in a meaningful way. After the session ended, I filed my observer report, updated my log, and sent one message home, not to the diplomatic office, not to the Foreign Affairs Committee. I sent it directly to Earth Command, through the standard relay, and it said exactly what it needed to say. I told them the council had done nothing. I told them 11 of our people were being held in Kreth detention. I told them where and how, and why the council had declined to act. Then I went back to watching the gas giant and waiting. The reply took 6 hours. Interstellar relay time, compression delays, the usual friction of distance. When it finally came through, I almost missed it because it was so short. It said, "We know, we are already moving." 6 words, no signature, no department stamp, no indication of what moving meant or how many people were involved or what the plan was. I read it 4 times. Then I saved it, closed my tablet, and poured myself another cup of the terrible coffee. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was afraid, though I was, not because I was angry, though I was that too. I stayed awake because something had shifted in the back of my mind, some quiet gear turning that I could not quite see yet. The council had dismissed us. The Kreth had calculated that we would accept a legal process, wait politely, and eventually settle for a negotiated resolution that let them keep whatever they had already gained. They had looked at humanity and seen the loud children, patient enough to manage, small enough to ignore. I kept thinking about that article, about the species that wrote it, about the fact that they were gone. And I kept thinking about those 6 words. We know, we are already moving. There was something in the simplicity of it. No outrage, no demands, no grand declarations, just a quiet statement of fact, like someone nodding that they had already put on their coat before stepping out into the rain. Not reactive, not emotional, just already in motion, already ahead of the moment, already somewhere that the rest of us had not caught up to yet. I did not know what was coming. I was a junior diplomat with no clearance for operational matters, no window into whatever Earth Command had decided to do. I was going to find out the same way everyone else did. But lying there in the dark, I found that I was not worried about our 11 people anymore. I was very quietly worried about the Kreth. The message from Earth Command sat on my screen for 3 days before anyone else knew it existed. I had not hidden it. There was no regulation requiring me to report a 6-word reply from home through any particular channel, and no one had asked. Counselor Oren was focused on a separate border dispute near the Thelian frontier. Ambassador Crane was preparing a formal protest letter, which he expected to submit within the week and which would enter the legal queue somewhere behind 40 other pending motions. Life at the observation post continued its careful, deliberate pace, and I continued my careful, deliberate role within it, attending briefings and taking notes and saying very little. But I was thinking, constantly, quietly, with the particular focus that comes when you know something important is about to happen and you cannot yet see its shape. On the 4th day after the seizure of the Aldwych Bridge, I submitted a research request through the Council's Historical Archive Division. It was a standard request, unremarkable, the kind of thing junior diplomats filed regularly when preparing background materials for senior staff. I asked for any records related to early-era Council incidents involving human contact. I expected the usual response, a modest packet of approved documents, filtered through 3 layers of diplomatic sensitivity review, arriving sometime in the next 2 weeks. Instead, I received, within 12 hours, a single message from the archive director, stating that the relevant files were sealed under a council preservation order and could not be released without a vote of the Security Committee. I stared at that message for a long time. Sealed, not classified, not restricted, not pending review. Sealed. The archive used that word for exactly one category of material, records whose release was considered a potential threat to council stability. In 19 years of human membership, I had never seen a research request trigger that response. I went to find Counselor Oren again. He was in his office, exactly where he always was, and this time when I walked in he looked up from his work, and I could tell from the way his membranes shifted that he already knew what I was going to say. I told him the archive had sealed my request. He nodded slowly. He did not look surprised. I asked him about the Davin. For a moment he was very still. Then he set down his stylus and folded his hands on the desk in front of him, and he looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. It was not discomfort exactly. It was closer to the look of someone who has been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and is deciding whether to set it down. He told me to close the door. I closed the door and sat down across from him, and he was quiet for almost a full minute before he spoke. He said that the Davin were not in the public record because the Council, very early in its history, had made a collective decision to remove them from it. Not to protect the Davin. The Davin were already gone by the time the decision was made. The removal was to protect the record itself from becoming a reference point, a model, an example that others might study too carefully. I asked him what the Davin had done. He said they had made contact with humanity approximately 6,000 years ago, when humans were pre-spaceflight and largely unaware that the galaxy was populated at all. The contact had not been gentle. The Davin had been an expansionist civilization with a practical view of resource acquisition, and they had treated the encounter with early humanity the way many expanding civilizations treated encounters with less developed species, as an opportunity. I asked him what happened. He said that what happened was not fully recorded, because the Council did not have observers there, and the Davin did not survive to file reports. What was known, pieced together from fragmentary records and the accounts of 2 other species who had been monitoring the region from a distance, was that the Davin had underestimated the response. They had pushed too hard, in ways that made it personal for the humans involved, and humanity had responded in a way that had no precedent in any species the Council had ever catalogued. Not with a single military action, not with a formal declaration or a strategic campaign, with a persistence that had no ceiling. An unwillingness to stop that outlasted every calculation the Daven had made about what was possible. The Daven were a civilization of some 8 billion individuals across 4 star systems. They had standing military forces and advanced technology and 600 years of expansion behind them. Within a generation of the contact, they were gone. I sat with that for a long time. Then I asked Oren the question that had been forming in my mind since the moment I found Article 0. I asked him who wrote it. He said the article was written by a council member called the Sara, a species that had been observing the situation from their own territory. They had watched what happened to the Daven. They had watched it in real time over decades, and at the end of it they had gone to the council founding session with a single contribution. Not a policy proposal, not a trade agreement. 2 lines in the foundational charter. The Sara, he told me, still existed. They were quiet and had minimal political presence and had not been involved in a council dispute in recorded history. They had one ambassador who almost never spoke. He said the Sara remembered what they had seen. I asked him why no one taught this, why it was sealed, why the council had spent 19 years treating humanity like an afterthought if there was a 6,000-year-old warning in the founding document saying not to provoke us. He said that memory fades, that 6,000 years is a very long time, that the species who had been present for the Daven incident were mostly gone, and the ones who remained kept quiet about it, and new council members joined without knowing, and old warnings looked like superstition after enough centuries. He said one more thing before he sent me out. He said, the warning was never really about humans being more powerful than other species. It was about a specific combination, a species that is deeply connected to each other, that protects its own with a ferocity that does not diminish over time or distance, that has no natural stopping point when the threat is personal. Every other species the council had ever encountered eventually stopped, he said, either from exhaustion or from the calculation that continuing was not worth the cost. Humanity had never, in any recorded observation, demonstrated that limit. He said, I hope your 11 people come home safely. I thanked him and left his office. On the way back to my desk, I passed the common area where 3 other station staff were watching the council news feed. The ticker at the bottom of the screen noted that Earth had dispatched 3 ships to the outer corridor in response to the Aldwych Bridge incident. The feed showed a brief clip of the Kreth ambassador at a press podium, laughing. 3 ships, he said to the cluster of journalists around him. They have sent 3 ships and 47 individuals against the full apparatus of the Kreth Dominion. He called it an insult dressed as a response. I watched him laugh. I thought about Counselor Oren's face. I thought about the Daven and the Sara, and a warning that had been sitting in the foundational document of galactic civilization for 6,000 years, while everyone forgot why it was there. I thought about those 3 ships. And I thought about the specific kind of person who volunteers by name for a retrieval mission into Kreth-controlled space with 46 other people and no apparent backup. The Kreth ambassador was still laughing on the screen. I looked up the names of the 47. They were available in the dispatch record, standard crew manifest, nothing classified. I read through the list slowly. The mission lead was listed as a woman named Yael Akaffer, rank given simply as retrieval specialist. Below her, 46 others. Some had military backgrounds, some did not. What they had in common was a single notation in each of their personnel records, the same phrase repeated 47 times, volunteered specifically for this assignment. I saved the manifest to my personal files. Then I pulled up a star chart of the outer corridor and found the system designated Veth Kara, where the Kreth Regional Command Station was located. I calculated the transit time from Earth's nearest relay point. I counted forward on the calendar. The 3 ships would arrive in 4 days. I closed the star chart and opened a fresh page in my personal log and began writing down everything I had learned, every conversation, every document, every detail. Because I had a feeling that in 4 days, the people in this observation post, and in the council chambers, and in the Kreth ambassador's comfortable office, were all going to want very much to understand how they had arrived at that moment. And I wanted to be the one who had already understood it. I titled the log entry, "Things Everyone Should Have Known." Then I started at the beginning. The Vethkara system had 4 planets and a regional command station that the Kreth Dominion had operated for 200 years. The station was large enough to house a standing force and served as the administrative hub for Kreth operations across the entire outer corridor. It was not a warship. It was not a frontline installation. It was, in the Kreth understanding of their own domain, a place so far from any serious threat that its garrison existed mostly as a formality. 4,000 personnel on duty at the time of the incident. I know this from the Kreth's own records, which became available through the Council's post-incident review process. The 3 human ships arrived at Vethkara 11 minutes ahead of their projected schedule. I know this from the station's own sensor logs, which were among the records recovered afterward. The logs noted that the ships had not come through the outer detection ring at all. They simply appeared on short-range sensors, already inside the perimeter, already in communication range, as if they had been there for some time and were only now choosing to be noticed. The initial contact was logged at 4:17 station time, a standard hailing frequency, the same format used by Council diplomatic vessels on routine visits. The duty officer at the communications console noted in his log that he assumed at first it was a Council inspection team and was preparing the standard hospitality protocol. The voice on the channel was calm and clear. She identified herself as Yael Akafer, representing the human retrieval team. She said she was calling to request the immediate release of 11 crew members from the Aldwych Bridge, held in Kreth custody. She specified that she wanted them unharmed, transported to a neutral transfer point of the station commander's choosing, within 60 minutes. The duty officer escalated immediately. Warduke Areth reached the command center within 7 minutes and took over the channel personally. I have read the transcript of their conversation many times. It is not long. Areth told Akafer that her request was noted, and that the crew of the Aldwych Bridge were being held legally under Council Bylaw 44C, and that any release would require formal negotiation through Council channels, which she was welcome to pursue. He said it the way someone says a thing they have said before, a prepared script for a predictable situation. Akafer said she understood his position, and that she was not there to negotiate through Council channels. She said she was there to retrieve 11 people and return them home, and she was offering him one opportunity to make that happen in a way that was straightforward for everyone. Areth asked her how she intended to take 11 people from a station, with a 4,000-strong garrison, using 3 ships and 47 personnel. She said she wanted to make sure he understood something before the conversation went further. She said, "We did not bring an army. We brought specialists. I am giving you one opportunity to make a different choice." Areth said the conversation was over and ordered her ships to withdraw or be fired upon. What happened next was recorded in the station's internal systems, which continued logging automatically until they were selectively shut down by persons unknown approximately 9 minutes later. What the 47 did in those 9 minutes was not something anyone from the retrieval team ever described in public. No briefing, no memoir, no interview. The Council review received an after-action report that covered the outcome and the timeline and almost nothing else. When people asked the 47 about it directly, they said the same thing in slightly different words. The mission was completed. Our people were recovered. Here is the report. What the Kreth records showed was simpler and stranger than anyone expected. The station's 4,000 personnel were not harmed. No one was eliminated. No one was seriously injured. But within 9 minutes, every response system the station had was offline. Every communication channel was locked except the one Akafer was using. Every access point to the detention level had been opened from the inside, by unknown means, before anyone on the station had registered that anything was happening. The 11 crew members of the Aldwych Bridge walked out. All 11. They were escorted to a transfer shuttle by 4 members of Akafar's team, who walked beside them calmly, the way you might walk someone to the door at the end of a long visit. The remaining 43 members of the retrieval team spent the last 3 minutes of the 9 going through the station's systems, in a way the after-action report described as a systematic capability review of the station's command infrastructure. I asked someone years later what that phrase meant in practical terms. They said it meant the 43 checked everything they had touched and made certain nothing could follow the ships when they left. Warduke Areth was found in his own detention area, unharmed, seated on a bench with his hands in his lap looking at the wall across from him. He did not resist. He did not speak for several hours after station personnel found him. When he finally gave a statement, it was 4 sentences long, and the last one was that he had underestimated the situation. The single Kreth officer who remained fully conscious and mobile throughout the entire 9 minutes was a junior communications technician named Sevet, who had been at her post when the first contact came through and had stayed there because she did not know what she was supposed to do instead. She was interviewed 3 separate times during the council review. She gave the same account on all 3 occasions without variation. She said the 47 had moved through the station without shouting, without anything that looked like aggression for its own sake. She said they were very precise. She said they spoke to each other in short, quiet phrases, and when they addressed Kreth personnel, their tone was polite and their instructions were clear. She said the hardest part to explain was the face of the woman leading the team. Akafar had passed through the communications area twice, and Sevet had been able to see her clearly both times. She said Akafar did not look angry. She did not look afraid. She looked the way someone looks when they are doing a task they have done many times before and know they can do well. Focused entirely on what was in front of her. Calm in a way that had nothing to do with the situation being calm. Calm because the situation was something she had already accounted for. Sevet said, "That was the part I did not know how to respond to, not knowing how to meet something that was not interested in a confrontation. They were not there for us. They were never there for us. We were simply the building the door was inside." The 3 ships left Vethkara at 4:31 station time. The 11 crew members of the Aldwych Bridge were aboard. The operation had taken 14 minutes from the moment of first contact. Akafar sent 1 transmission to the Galactic Council as the ships cleared Kreth space. It was brief. It said, "We have recovered our people. We will be filing a report. Please ensure this does not require a follow-up visit." I was at my desk on Halo 7 when the message came through the relay. I read it twice. Then I went to find Counselor Oren, but his office was empty. I found him in the observation lounge, standing at the window, watching the gas giant exactly the way I had been watching it the morning the first alert came through. I stood beside him, and neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said, "I hope the council is paying attention this time." I said, "Do you think they will be?" He was quiet for a moment longer. Then he said, "They will be afraid. Whether they translate that into the right kind of attention is a different matter." I went back to my desk and opened my log and wrote until I could not keep my eyes open. I wrote down everything I could remember about the past 17 days, in the right order, with as much detail as I could hold. When I read it back, the shape of it was simple even if the details were not. 11 people taken, 47 sent, 9 minutes of work, 14 minutes total, and a report filed through proper channels as required by protocol. I sat with that last part for a long time. Not the 9 minutes, the report. Filed correctly, submitted on time. Addressed to the appropriate parties. As if the whole thing were simply a matter that had needed handling and had now been handled, and the next step was the paperwork, and the paperwork would be done correctly because that was how you did things. I thought about Areth at his press podium 3 days earlier, laughing about 47 people and 3 ships. I genuinely wondered if he was still capable of laughing, sitting in his own detention area in the silence after the ships left. I thought I probably would not be. The council emergency session was called within 18 hours of Akafar's transmission. I had a seat in the observer gallery, which meant I was above and slightly behind the main chamber floor, looking down at the curved arrangement of ambassador stations in a wide half-circle facing the central podium. I had sat in that gallery dozens of times, and it had always felt like watching something slow and deliberate unfold. That morning it felt different. There was a quality to the room that I had no good prior reference for. Not anger and not fear, but something underneath both of them. The recognition that a situation had changed shape, and that no one had yet agreed on what the new shape meant or required. The Kreth ambassador, a senior diplomat named Vorek, was already at his station when I arrived. He held himself very still. He had the practiced stillness of someone who had chosen a posture and was maintaining it through effort. Beside him, 2 aides spoke in low voices. Across the chamber, the Thelian ambassador and the Soran ambassador sat with the particular quiet of people who had decided to watch rather than prepare arguments. Ambassador Philip Crane was at the human station. He nodded briefly at me when I came in and looked back at his materials. He had been awake most of the night. I could see it in the set of his face. He was a methodical man, and he had prepared thoroughly, and he had the expression of someone who knows the terrain of the meeting they are walking into, but is not entirely certain which part of the terrain they will need. The session opened at 9 in the morning, station time. Vorek spoke first. He was controlled and precise. His argument was well constructed. He said that the actions of the human retrieval team in the Veth-Kara system constituted an unauthorized military operation conducted within the sovereign territory of a council member state. He said that the Kreth Dominion had been operating inside existing legal frameworks when it detained the Aldwych Bridge crew, that the matter had been properly submitted to council review, and that humanity had bypassed every available legal process without making any genuine attempt to exhaust diplomatic channels. He said the council had a fundamental obligation, one that predated any individual grievance, to ensure that no member state could conduct unsanctioned military operations and face no consequence for it. He spoke for 11 minutes. It was a strong argument, and he delivered it well. When he finished, the chamber was quiet. Crane gave the human response. He was measured and thorough. He laid out the full sequence of events, the seizure of the Aldwych Bridge under a disputed legal justification in a corridor that had been open transit for over a decade, the Council's decision to table the matter for 60 days of review, and the practical reality that 60 days was not a viable timeline for 11 individuals in detention. He said humanity had exercised its right to recover its people through the most direct available means. He noted that the retrieval team had caused no fatalities, had operated with clear and limited purpose, and had subsequently filed a comprehensive report with the Council, exactly as required by the Incident Protocol framework. He was partway through his remarks when Ambassador Sareth of the Velthari stood. Sareth had held his seat for 60 years. In every session I had attended, I had seen him speak perhaps a dozen times, always briefly, always at the moment when the room was trending toward a conclusion he considered wrong. When he stood, people stopped and listened. Not out of formal deference, though he had earned that too. Out of something closer to the recognition that when Sareth used words, they were worth hearing. He did not wait to be formally recognized. He stood and the chamber went quiet and Crane stopped speaking. Sareth looked at the room for a long moment. Then he reached into the folio on his desk, removed a single sheet, and read from it. He read Article 0. He read it first in the original language of the species that had written it, an old language that very few in the chamber would have recognized, and then he translated it line by line into standard Galactic slowly, with no inflection that might color the meaning. Do not touch humans. Do not provoke them. Do not make them remember what they are. Then he set the paper down and said nothing for a moment, and the silence in the chamber had a weight to it that I felt somewhere below thinking. He spoke for 23 minutes. He began by saying that the council had spent the last 18 hours debating whether the human action at Vethkara was a violation of sovereign territory, and that this was the wrong question. The right question was how the council had arrived at a moment where the debate was necessary at all. How had a situation been allowed to develop that made this outcome not just possible but predictable? He said the council had accepted humanity into membership 19 years ago with a broad and comfortable understanding that humans were a capable young species who would grow into their role over time. This understanding, he said, had produced a specific kind of treatment. Patient when convenient, patronizing when not, consistently underestimating. The council had looked at humanity and seen the newest member, the late arrival, the species still learning the customs. He said the council had not done its reading. Then he said the part that I have quoted in every account I have written in the 31 years since that day, because it was the most honest and precise thing I have ever heard delivered in a council chamber in my entire diplomatic career. He said, we built this council on the understanding that civilization means choosing restraint. We wrote that article not to protect humans. We wrote it to protect ourselves. Because when humans commit to something, they do not stop. They retrieved 11 people from a garrison of 4,000 with 47 specialists, and when it was finished, they filed a report. A report. They are not angry with this council today. They are not making demands or issuing ultimatums. They are patient. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand how unsettling it is to be in a dispute with a species that treats an operation like Vethkara as a matter to be documented and submitted through proper channels? He paused. The chamber was completely still. He said, this council has dealt with warriors. It has dealt with empires. It has cataloged species that expanded by force, species that expanded by persuasion, species that outlasted everyone around them through sheer endurance. But in 6,000 years of recorded history, we have never encountered a species that combines what humans combine: the depth of their attachment to each other, the completeness of their commitment when that attachment is threatened, and the absence of any point at which they calculate that stopping is more reasonable than continuing. Every species we have ever met reaches that calculation eventually. Humans have not shown us where that point is, and the reason Article 0 exists, sitting in our own foundational charter, is because 6,000 years ago a civilization called the Davan went looking for that point. They looked for it very thoroughly. They do not exist anymore. He looked at the Kreth station across the chamber. He said, the Davan believed they were managing something small, something that would absorb what had been done to it and eventually settle. They were wrong. I am asking this council today to not require another demonstration of that lesson. He sat down. The chamber broke into noise. Vorek was on his feet immediately, demanding the floor, characterizing Sarath's speech as an attempt to intimidate council members through historical fearmongering. The Thelian ambassador was in rapid conversation with her aide. The representative from the Sauran delegation, the one who almost never spoke, sat with complete stillness and watched the center of the room. The noise went on for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Vorek made his argument again, compressed and sharper. He called for a formal council vote to censure humanity's actions and require mandatory council authorization before any future human military operation could be conducted. He appealed to the principle that no member, regardless of the grievance it claimed, could operate outside the council framework without consequences. He spoke directly to each delegation in turn, naming shared interests, naming shared principles. It was a good speech. He was a skilled diplomat, Under almost any other circumstances, in any other room, about any other subject, it might have worked. The vote was called. I watched the tally as it came through on the display above the chamber floor. No, abstain, no, abstain, abstain, no, abstain, no, abstain, no. The count ran through every member, not one vote to censure, not from anyone except the Kreth. Vorek sat very still while the result was read. He looked at the display for a long time. He did not look at the human station. He did not look at Sarath. He had the expression of someone who has just finished a calculation they did not want to complete and arrived at a result they cannot dispute. The chamber had done the same calculation, quietly during the debate, behind the formal motions and the speeches, and they had all arrived at the same answer. Crane stood to give the human statement in response to the vote. He thanked the council for its confidence. He said humanity remained fully committed to the responsibilities of its membership. He said it correctly and gracefully, and it was appropriate to the moment. Then he said one more thing, and this time he was not reading from prepared remarks. He said that humanity had submitted an application for a permanent seat on the Security Committee 11 years ago. He said that application had been pending review for that entire time. He said it seemed appropriate, in light of recent events and the council's expressed confidence, to bring the application to a vote. He sat down. There was a pause of perhaps 4 seconds. The vote was called. It passed unanimously. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath that I had apparently been holding for longer than I realized. Below me, Crane was receiving the formal acknowledgments of the nearest ambassadors. Sarath caught my eye from across the chamber and gave one small, deliberate nod. The Sauran representative was already gathering his things to leave. I picked up my bag and came down from the gallery into the corridor outside the chamber. A young Thelian diplomatic aide named Myra fell into step beside me. She was perhaps 25, one of the newer generation of council staff, and she had been in the gallery the entire session with the focused attention of someone determined to understand exactly what they were witnessing. She asked me if I had been scared during all of it, during the whole thing. I thought about that question seriously, the way it deserved. I thought about the 6 words on my screen in the early morning hours after the council voted to wait 60 days. I thought about 11 people in a Kreth detention hold, and the 4 days of calendar entries and procedural courtesy that stood between them and any official response. I thought about Sevet, the Kreth communications technician, describing Akafar's face and finding no word for what she had seen there. I thought about one name on the Aldwych Bridge crew manifest that would not be going into the returned column, a young man named Garrett Finn, 29 years old, from the north of England, whose family had been notified while I was still in the observer gallery watching the first council session. I had not known his name then. I knew it now. I said yes, terrified, all of us the entire time. That is the part everyone always gets wrong about this. Myra looked at me. She waited. I said, everyone who hears about Vethkara assumes that what happened there was fearless. They look at 47 people going into a station with 4,000 and they see something that does not feel the way the rest of us feel. But that is not what it was. We were afraid from the moment the first alert came through. I was afraid sitting in that gallery. The retrieval team was afraid going into Vethkara. Yale Akafar was afraid every second of those 14 minutes. The difference was not the absence of fear. The difference was that the fear was not the deciding factor. She said, then what was? I thought about it. There were 11 people who needed to come home, I said. That was what was. There was no calculation larger than that. There was no strategy that weighed the fear against the risk, against the political consequence, and arrived at a rational conclusion. There were 11 people waiting and 47 people who were not going to leave without them. Fear was present. Fear was real. Fear simply was not enough to change the answer. She nodded slowly. We had reached the junction in the corridor where our paths separated. I said goodbye and walked back to my office. and I sat down at my desk and opened my log, and I wrote for 3 hours without stopping. It has been 31 years since the Vethkara incident. I am writing this on the terrace of a small house on the colony world of Perrin's Ridge, where I have lived for the last 6 years, since the knee problems made long hours at a diplomatic station more trouble than they were worth. The sky here turns a particular shade of orange in the evenings, something between amber and something I have no good name for, and I have grown deeply fond of it. There is a garden that I tend with more enthusiasm than skill, and a neighbor named Jeffrey who brings me vegetables from his considerably better garden, and a cat named Incident who arrived at my door already named, and has declined to answer to anything else. This is not the life I pictured when I was 34 years old on Halo 7, drinking terrible coffee and staring at a gas giant, and wondering what 6 words from Earth Command were going to mean. But it is a very good life, and I am aware, in a way that deepens rather than fades with time, that its goodness is connected, in both direct and indirect ways, to the events I have spent the last several months writing down. There are things I want to say clearly, before this account is finished, for whoever reads it after I am gone. The galaxy changed after Vethkara. It did not change all at once, and it did not change in the sweeping, visible ways that history tends to remember. There was no single moment of transformation, no speech or treaty that drew a clean line between one era and the next. Real change rarely works that way. It happened gradually, and then suddenly, and then gradually again, the way most things that matter actually move. Within a year of the incident, humanity had its Security Committee seat, and 3 new trade partnership offers from species that had shown no particular interest in deeper human relations before that point. Within 5 years, Sareth had succeeded in getting the Council to formally include a review of Article 0 in the orientation materials for all new member species, a change he pursued quietly and persistently until the votes were there. Within a decade, there were 7 human ambassadors in senior council positions, including one who eventually led the Council's Dispute Resolution Division for 12 years and did the job very well. We did not become beloved. I want to be honest about that because the stories about Vethkara sometimes imply a warmth in what followed that was not really there. The species that had dismissed us did not suddenly like us. What they did was take us seriously, respectful in the specific way that comes from genuine regard for what something is, rather than from affection. I have spent a great deal of time over 3 decades wondering whether I prefer that to being liked without being taken seriously, and I have not settled on a clean answer. There is something uncomfortable about respect rooted primarily in caution. There is something equally uncomfortable about affection that comes with condescension built in. Somewhere between those 2 things is a place I think humanity has been working toward ever since, and I believe we are getting closer. The Kreth Dominion went through a significant period of internal change in the years following Vethkara. Warduke Areth resigned his position within 3 months. The Dominion's approach to operations in the outer corridor changed substantially, through a combination of council pressure and what I believe was a genuine and private reckoning with what had happened at their regional command station. In the years since, the Kreth have been cautious neighbors. Not warm, cautious. Given the alternative, I consider that a reasonable outcome. I met Yael Akefer once. It was at a government reception in Geneva, 7 years after Vethkara, a quiet evening honoring council diplomatic service. She was there in civilian capacity, no rank displayed, no indication in her appearance of the thing she was most known for. She was smaller than I had imagined, which surprised me even though I am not sure why I had imagined anything in particular. She had sharp, clear eyes and the manner of someone who is completely at ease in any room because they have long since stopped needing any room's approval. We spoke for about 10 minutes. She was thoughtful and direct, and she had no particular interest in talking about Vethkara, which I respected without being surprised by. But at the end of our conversation, because I had been carrying the question for 7 years, and this was almost certainly the only opportunity I would get. I asked her what the 47 had actually done in those 9 minutes. She considered the question briefly. Then she said whatever was necessary, and then we stopped. That was all she said about it. 6 words. I have thought about those 6 words as many times as I have thought about the other 6. We know, we are already moving. 2 sets of 6 words bracketing the whole thing, and between them everything else. The council sessions, the sealed archive, Sareth reading Article 0 in a language most of the chamber did not recognize. Areth sitting in silence in his own detention area. 11 crew members walking out through a corridor into the hands of 4 quiet strangers who had come a very long way and had always intended to come back out. Whatever was necessary, and then we stopped. The stopping is the part that other species struggled with most. That is what I came to understand over the years that followed. They expected pursuit. They expected the humans to press the advantage while the Kreth were still in disarray, to leverage the moment into territorial or political gains, to do what civilizations traditionally do when they demonstrate unexpected capability. Instead, the 3 ships went home. The report was filed. The next morning, Earth Command's daily operational log listed the mission as completed and closed. The people who had been on those ships went back to whatever they had been doing before. That was genuinely confusing to the species watching it. They did not have a framework for a civilization that could do what the 47 had done, and then simply return to its ordinary existence without pressing further. What I understand now that I was only beginning to understand at 34 is that the stopping and the going are the same thing expressed differently. Humanity goes because there is someone who needs to come home. Once that need is answered, the reason for going no longer exists. It is not mercy and it is not restraint in the strategic sense of holding back for future use. It is simply purpose, specific and complete. There was a task. The task is done. Here is the documentation. The mission was not about the Kreth. It was never about the Kreth. They were the obstacle between the retrieval team and the people they had come to find. When the people were found, the mission was over. That is what unsettled every ambassador in that chamber. Not the capability alone, extraordinary as it was, the purposefulness of it, the absolute clarity of the reason combined with the absolute absence of hesitation in acting on that reason. Every other species runs a calculation at some point, in which the potential cost of continuing is weighed against the potential benefit of stopping. Humanity did not appear to run that calculation when its own people were at stake. The cost was simply not the relevant variable. The only question was whether the task was possible. And apparently, most things are possible when you are very good at them, and you are not going to stop. The Council does not operate the way it did before Vethkara, not because of a single rule change or a restructured charter, because of a quiet shift in how the species within it understand a particular kind of limit. The debates still happen. The votes still get tabled. The bureaucracy still moves at its own considered pace. That is the nature of governing bodies, and it is probably healthy in most contexts. But there is a line now, not written anywhere that I can find, not formally agreed upon in any session I attended. It simply became understood across every diplomatic hall and trade negotiation and border discussion from the inner council worlds to the edges of the outer reach. The way some things become understood, through shared experience that no one particularly wants to repeat. You can work alongside humans. You can negotiate with them and vote against them and disagree with them in the long, grinding way of political process. You can find them frustrating and loud and occasionally baffling in their attachment to things you consider minor. All of that is ordinary and manageable, and they are generally good company once you understand that the volume does not indicate instability. It just indicates that they are present and engaged. But you do not take their people, because they will not send a fleet with ultimatums and waiting periods and formal declarations. They will send exactly as many as the task requires, and the people they send will be people who asked to go, who read the file and raised their hand and said, That is the mission. I want that mission, and they will not come back until the people they went for are with them. And when it is done, they will write the report and submit it through the correct channels, and then go on with the rest of their lives. And 30 years later, someone who was a junior diplomat on the periphery of the whole thing will be sitting on a terrace on a colony world writing it all down. I want to say Garrett Finn's name before I finish. He was 29 years old and he came from a small town in the north of England, and he had been working freight routes for 3 years when the Creth boarded the Aldwych Bridge. He was the crew member who did not come home. The official record lists his death as occurring prior to the retrieval team's arrival, in circumstances the Creth characterized as a medical situation. The family was notified. There was a memorial service. I was not present because I did not know his name yet. I have known it for 31 years. I write it down every time I write about Veth Kara because the story is usually told in terms of the 47 and the vote and the political realignment, and those things are true and they matter. But it started because 11 people were taken, and it ended with 10 of them coming home, and Garrett Finn was 29 years old, and he never got to see what came after. This is what came after Garrett. The people in that chamber learned to read the footnotes. Not all of them, and not perfectly, and not without a great deal of additional frustration and patience and the ordinary slow work of changing how institutions think about things. But enough. It changed enough. That has to count for something, and I choose to believe that it does. There is a frame on the wall of my terrace. It has been on the wall of every office and every home I have lived in since Halo 7, moved 12 times across 6 worlds, wrapped carefully each time in a cloth my mother gave me, placed on the first wall before anything else was unpacked. It is plain, no decoration, standard typeface, the kind of document format that Earth Command uses for all official communications. 4 words. We know we are already moving. That is what I want people to take from this, more than the 9 minutes or the unanimous vote or the shape of what changed in the years that followed. Those things matter, but they are the consequence. The thing itself is 4 words sent through a standard relay at 6 in the morning by an organization that had already decided what it was going to do before anyone asked it a question. When 11 people were taken, and the governing body of 40 civilizations decided it needed 60 days to form an opinion on the matter, Earth did not wait for permission. It did not call a press conference or draft a position paper or seek approval from any authority larger than the one that lived in every person who heard about what had happened and felt in the place below, thinking that this was simply not acceptable and something was going to be done about it. It moved. It was already moving. And that is what Article 0 was always about. Not a warning that humans were the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, because they were not. Not a warning that humans were the most technologically advanced, because they were not that either. A warning that this particular species had something that did not change. A fundamental principle operating below every policy and protocol and century of careful diplomacy. We know where our people are. We are coming. We will file the paperwork when we get back. The sky outside is turning that orange I have no name for. Incident has settled on my knee and is making a sound like a small engine. Jeffrey left tomatoes on the step this morning, and I forgot to bring them in. I am old and my knee hurts, and I am tired in the way that comes from having thought very hard for a very long time about something that mattered, and I am glad I thought about it, and I am glad I wrote it down, and I am glad, more than I know how to say simply, that we went. All of us were afraid. We went anyway.